From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Kristen Amiet. It's Wednesday, November 20. Just weeks after the government cancelled a space program worth $7 billion, it's been revealed Elon Musk's SpaceX launched a satellite for the Australian Defence Force. The secret communications device is part of a $405 million contract between the ADF and Optus. Construction sites in Victoria could be subject to snap 24-hour shutdowns in the coming days. Building unions say they're concerned their offices could be targeted by bikies as the fallout from the CFMEU scandal continues. Those stories are live right now at theaustralian.com.au. The government has sidestepped urging by our AUKUS allies to give civilians faster access to nuclear technology. And it's exposed a deep irony in the Labor Party's position on nuclear. In today's episode, where the government draws the line and how it could be a golden opportunity for the opposition. On Monday night, at the United Nations Annual Climate Change Assembly, the United Kingdom's Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband, and the United States Deputy Secretary of Energy, David Turk, signed an agreement to pour billions of dollars into the research and development of nuclear technology. It's part of a bigger plan to cut carbon emissions and provide security for the energy industry as it transitions from fossil fuels to renewable energy solutions. 31 nations have already signed on to help triple nuclear capacity before the end of the decade and make new nuclear technology available by 2050. And our AUKUS allies made it abundantly clear they expect Australia to get on board. But on Tuesday, Australia's climate change minister said that's a hard no.
It was not unexpected that Australia would not support this nuclear proposal. There was one at the last COP meeting and we didn't support that. We are an observer.
Dennis Shanahan is the Australian's national editor.
But the real problem for the government in this case was that Ed Miliband, the UK Energy Secretary, said we were expected to sign it, and he referred to our allies. In other words, our AUKUS partners with whom we have a nuclear-powered submarine agreement wanted us to join the new enhanced development program for civilian nuclear energy. Now, okay, the government decided not to do that in keeping with its policy, but it was an ill-prepared decision, and what it has done has highlighted the contradictory nature of actually having a nuclear-powered submarine program, and once again, there was a lack of preparedness in something that Chris Bowen knew was coming. It happened at the last COP. It was going to happen at this COP, and yet we were caught flat-footed and embarrassed.
Chris Bowen is in Azerbaijan for COP29. And a statement released by his office said, more or less, that Australia doesn't need nuclear power because we have better weather. It's being read by a voice actor.
Our international partners understand that Australia's abundance of renewable energy resources makes nuclear power an unviable option for inclusion in our energy mix for decarbonisation efforts.
Labor is backing renewables like solar as the path forward.
Put simply, London has only 1,633 hours of sunshine hours in an average year. By comparison, Australia's least sunny capital city is Melbourne, with 2,362, while our sunniest capital city is Perth, has 3,229.
The statement dropped in the midst of a ferocious attack by Labor on the Liberal Party's nuclear policy. Here's the acting Prime Minister, Richard Marles, in Parliament on Tuesday.
For Australia, pursuing a path of nuclear energy would represent pursuing the single most expensive electricity option on the planet.
Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek said nuclear energy takes too long to develop, meaning millions of tonnes of carbon will continue to be pumped into the atmosphere in the meantime.
It makes the government look too ideologically driven, and it doesn't look at them making a serious decision about the appeal from the US and the UK, and about 30 other nations, leading nations, including Canada and France, and it just makes it look like we are isolating ourselves and we're not talking about some of the clearly very serious issues, and not just the firming of energy, which is what Ed Miliband was talking about, but also the cutting of carbon emissions. So the UK and the US, a Labor government and a Democratic government, were asking Australian Labor government to join them in securing energy security and cutting carbon emissions as part of the decarbonisation of industry. So it seems pretty obvious that at least we should talk about it. And so I think the way the government has gone about it, declaring it's outlawed and using an argument that, Perth and Melbourne, even Melbourne, is sunnier than London, and makes it look a bit puerile.
Coming up, the British government's nuclear-sized gift to Peter Dutton. Back in June, opposition leader Peter Dutton announced his party's plan to establish nuclear reactors at 7 locations around Australia if the coalition gets up at the next election.
We know that the government has a renewables-only policy which is just not fit for purpose.
The announcement was the centrepiece of a radical new stance on energy policy that could see the government's legislated 2030 emissions reductions target scrapped.
No other country in the world can keep the lights on 24/7 with the renewables-only policy. We need to make sure that hospitals can stay on 24/7. We need to make sure that cold rooms can stay on 24/7. We need to make sure that our economy can function 24/7, and we can only do that with a strong baseload power.
So, when the US and the UK urged Australia to join that global movement towards nuclear, it gave Peter Dutton a gift.
What they've done is put out a perfectly logical, perfectly reasonable approach to expanding civilian nuclear energy around the world, working together with a whole range of other nations, including China, to actually reduce carbon emissions and provide more secure and cheaper energy to industry. Now, this seemed perfectly reasonable, and yet Australia is now being seen to reject it utterly. And Peter Dutton immediately picked up on it and said Australia is now isolating itself, and he used the term, we're embarrassing ourselves on the world stage. Now, here's Peter Dutton, the leader of the coalition, saying that the Labor Party is embarrassing itself on the world stage over what? Climate change.
But the coalition has been vague on the details, refusing to release detailed costings of the nuclear scheme, which would see a mix of smaller modular nuclear reactors and full-size facilities built on the sites of existing power stations.
So he is fudging on his own costings, the details of his own policy, and yet today has given him another excuse to attack Labor over climate change and nuclear energy. It turned around in 24 hours. This is not good politics. It helps Dutton, and it helps him slip out from under once again on not having to provide the detail of his own policy, which he should be providing and which people are saying he should provide, but Labor gives him another excuse to avoid it.
And with the cost of living front of mind for most voters in the run-up to next year's federal election, the major parties are keen to pitch their solutions.
What Labor is trying to do is reduce the nuclear argument to one of cost. And what they are saying is that Peter Dutton's nuclear policy will cost more than their renewables policy. One of the other reasons, of course, is they can't use the old argument about nuclear being dangerous because they're actually buying 8 nuclear reactors from the UK for the submarines. The problem for them, or why they're doing this, is that Dutton has pursued the cost of living and the cost of energy, and at the last election, Anthony Albanese promised on more than 90 occasions that people's power bills would drop by $275. And come January 1, that's an officially broken promise. So, yes, the cost of living will be the main element, but energy will be at the heart of that, not just on the cost, but on what plans you have to address it. Dutton's argument is if you don't have nuclear in the mix, you can't have reliable and you will have more expensive renewable energy because of transmission costs. So it is a fight over the cost of living, it's a fight over the cost of energy, and nuclear is the vehicle with which the two sides are trying to have it out.
Dennis Shanahan is The Australian's national editor. You can read his analysis, as well as all the nation's best news, sport and politics, right now at theaustralian.com.au.